Welcome back to The Thinker, everyone. Interesting topic perhaps. The other day we did a video, it was when Spain and Portugal were undergoing a total electrical blackout, for some parts for nearly as much as 24 hours. We did a video at the time, we didn't actually notice ourselves at first. We're 100% off grid, and we had no idea that this was going on. And the sort of point of the video at the time was that our internet was still working, and we couldn't understand how we still had internet when the whole of Spain and Portugal was in total 100% power outage. It must have transpired that they must have had battery backup on some of the systems, because our internet worked nearly all of the day. It did cut off eventually, but I've now taken steps to change our internet for Starlink, to be honest, so that won't happen again. It shouldn't do. Should this happen again? And will this happen again? How did it happen? How can a whole country lose its power? Several countries lose total power for nearly 24 hours. It's a bit of a worrying time, really. Can it happen again? I think it's probably likely to as time goes on. So what's the consequences and what can we do about it? So from our point of view, and we're not conspiracy theorists, we're not preppers, we're not gloating, but this brought home quite a lot of things to us. As I said, we had total power, totally off grid. We produced our own power. Everything went as normal. Even the internet was still working. So we didn't actually realise that this has happened. But it would affect us, especially if it went on for a longer period, because things like the shops weren't open. Well, some of them were. It transpires that they had generator backup, but they couldn't take card payments, so people could go shopping to these places that were open. Weren't all of them by any stretch, but you could still pay with cash. Which again, if this went on for a longer period, as I say, we're not conspiracy theorists or anything, but even no one expected that, no one saw that coming. And if it went on for 2, 3, 4 days, who knows? You wouldn't even be able to buy anything food-wise unless you had cash. But the powers that be seem to be two things that's come to light here. They're trying to steer us away from cash, to use card payments or mobile phone payments or even your watch payments, to do away with cash completely, or it seems that way, and trying to steer us, it would appear, onto being all electric for everything, to get away from fossil fuels. So it's a little bit worrying, really. Should we kind of resist this a little bit? Because those people that had cash could go and still buy food and things like that. I realise that there are people that live in cities, in towns, in apartment blocks, and there's very, very limited in what you can do to get by in a situation like this. You could have a situation where there's no water, the water goes off if that doesn't have backup power, because that's all pumped. But I mean, the cash thing is probably the first one. All the high street shops, even though there were some supermarkets open, they weren't all, but all the high street shops are disappearing. I'm sure they'd take cash. You could go and get your provisions and things there. So coming back to the electrics, I for one couldn't imagine being dependent on electric for me cooking, heating, hot water, even electric cars. If this should happen again for a prolonged period, we can all survive for 24 hours or whatever. We can eat sandwiches and what have you. But how do you cook your food if your cooking's all electric? Again, it wasn't cold at the time. It certainly wasn't here in Spain anyway. But imagine if it was the middle of winter and it was really bitterly cold outside, and you're just relying on electric for your heating. Again, if it's for a prolonged period, that will be a very unpleasant and even potentially life-threatening situation in some cases, in extreme cases. You know, hot water, we can all do without a shower for a day, can't we? But if you can't heat your water up, you know, again for a prolonged period, you've got no hot water for washing up, you can't even boil the kettle on the stove because it's an electric stove. You know what I'm getting at, electric cars. You know, alright, yep, they'll have to go quite a few days out of them, but if you just happen to be caught at that point where your battery on your car needs charging, and you've got no grid to plug it into to charge it, you can't go even buy the food if you had the cash to do so and you found a shop that was working. So as I said, we're not conspiracy theorists or preppers. We found ourselves in a very fortunate situation, very fortunate position, purely by, well, chance to a certain extent, to our circumstances, the way, you know, we live our life essentially. It just got me thinking about things, you know, what can we do, you know, what would we do if this was a prolonged thing? It did go on for a while, you know, which a few things popped up. Obviously the first one was the internet. Then it got me thinking about, again, people in cities and apartments and that. The power went out, there were no mobile phones. You couldn't, even in an emergency, you were unable to call for help. That's a bit worrying as well. You know, I don't know what to say really. It's kind of shocking really. You know, Sharon's mum's 91, just speaks to her every day. So you couldn't even ring her mum or, you know, anything to even just chat to her, because obviously, you know, that's always a worry as well. If we had internet, if we all had internet, then at least we could use WhatsApp or, you know, whatever through that means. Without the phone lines, it wouldn't matter. But obviously, most people, their internet is provided through a router in the house or on the phones. The phones weren't working, and because there was no electric, the router wasn't working either. So, you know, it's what do you do in a situation like that? What can you do in the future to keep that working, to keep that communication lines open? I said with us, we're getting Starlink. Whether we'll be able to contact anybody else should it happen again. If not, you know, if other people that have Starlink, yes. This isn't an advert for Starlink, by the way. We're not sponsored by them or anything like that. So essentially, you couldn't buy anything if you're using card. Some supermarkets were geared up for cash, the others, because the internet was down, their terminals weren't working to pay by card or watch or phone or whatever your choice of payment is. You couldn't buy fuel, even if the petrol stations would accept cash. Most of the pumps weren't working for the fuel as well. The idea, I think the video is just about a bit of thought-provoking. What can you do? What can we do? And I don't have the answers, not all of them anyway, to help ease a situation like that should it be a prolonged system. I think, you know, try and keep using cash, make sure cash stays in circulation, and at least we can buy food and fuel should we buy in a place. You might have a petrol station that's got a generator backup so they can still keep pumping fuel. If they take cash, then you can still buy your fuel. I don't know, interesting topic for discussion. Really. I think a lot of things are pretty obvious to people, you know, keep a supply of fuel, keep a supply of food stocked up, have a little Armageddon cupboard somewhere. Not that I'm expecting it to be an Armageddon or anything. Even your freezers, you know, they say food will keep for 24 to 48 hours in a freezer. If you don't open the door, well, how are you supposed to eat anything? If you've not got anything, you can't buy anything if you don't open your freezer door. So no, interesting thought, I think. You know, it's, yeah, I think we all need to try and do something to not be so dependent on the system and technology away, because when the technology fails, when the electric fails, the technology fails, the whole country fails, the whole world fails. You know, as I say, it's not by design but by circumstances. we could actually probably live for 3 to 6 months, we could survive for here without seeing a soul. You know, which is quite comfortable. Again, we're not gloating or anything like that, because we do feel, you know, for the people that aren't in our position, yeah, what do we do? Are we too dependent on the system and technology?